Hang on just a second. Everybody who's on, we're getting the stream set up on Facebook.
All right, I think you're live and recording.
Okay, awesome. All right, so I'm going to hit record here, and then we'll be ready to go.
We're already recording.
Okay, all right, great. Well, welcome everyone. I'm Catherine Boyle with Key Ministry. Thank you for joining our Wednesday webinar series. Today we're talking about a topic that is something that we have really embraced and been focusing on this year with Key Ministry. We're going to be talking about mental and emotional health, and specifically mental and emotional health for church leaders. So a couple months ago, my colleague Beth Golick mentioned that a new pastor on staff at their church had shared 5 things that would be good strategies or practices for any ministry leader to be putting into place in their life. And so we just thought this would be a great thing to share with our audience as well. So I want to welcome John Meaux. John is, I don't want to get your title wrong, John, so jump in here if I mess it up, but you are the Assistant Pastor of Care Ministries at Bay Pres in Bay Village, Ohio. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yep, you got it. Nailed it.
Okay. Well, wonderful. Well, so tell me a little bit about what does it mean to be the Assistant Pastor of Care Ministries at Bay Presbyterian?
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Getting the time to talk this afternoon with this topic. So what I do is I'm in charge of all care-related items. So primarily, it's going to be funerals. It's going to be hospital. Counseling. We have different ministries that like support groups and other things that will support and care for our church. It's not a compassion, not that we're giving out to the community, but it is mostly taking care of our church and our extended family and our communities. That's what we do through mental health and also spiritually.
Gotcha. That's excellent. So, well, tell me a little bit about yourself. I mean, how did you end up in this kind of role? I mean, is this something that's always been a passion for you, or do you have experience with how your family or you personally benefited from this kind of ministry?
Not at all. I used to sell cars, and that was about it. And they needed somebody. That's where it was.
Okay.
No, I have. It's kind of led me to these 5 pillars. My journey has kind of led me and forced me to these 5 pillars. It's almost many years of kind of walking through and doing it very wrong in my younger years, and kind of learning. I think I need to stop hitting my and I was born into a Christian family. My dad was a pastor, so I was a PK. And in being a PK and growing up in the church, as most of you ministry know, churches can be brutal, and it was brutal for my father, and it was just a big church mess, big church split, and he ended up leaving. And I swore to myself as a 13-year-old boy, I will never be a pastor, right? And those are the words you never want to say, you never to God. But through a course of going through my college years and joining Campus Crusade for Christ and seeing a heart for ministry, and then joining kind of a church loosely as a staff worship leader, kind of helping out with youth, I felt maybe God might want me to entertain the idea of possibly doing ministry, but that's about where I landed. So I had taken some classes through Trinity Evangelical School, a divinity school up in Chicago remotely. And when I got married, I thought, well, let's just go at least take the classes. So we went up there, we took some classes, and pursued my MDiv and fell in love with it. And through that course of being at school, I went into a church and became an assistant pastor of a church there for several years in Chicago. And out of that church experience, again, as churches can be, there was a huge just problem with the senior pastor. He had some very some big issues, and so it was killing the church, and it burned me out, and it hurt me. And so we had some trying to get mediation and try and fix the whole thing. But from that, I left there, and out of that pain of leaving not just my job, but leaving my church family who I loved, and relocating, these 5 things came to me in a way through a course of a long period of stretch of time, in order to help me stay emotionally healthy, to help me stay consistent as who God called me to be, in terms of being a pastor, because it's a little different between pastor and just a lay person in your church. And we'll explain that in a little bit later. But then I moved back to wife is from Cleveland, some opportunities to church plant. And so we came here to church plant, and that fell apart. So I got three things falling apart all the time, and it wasn't working out. And every church I kind of put my finger on, I got tired. I was done. I was like, I can't do this anymore. I'm just going to go be John Meaux for a while. I'm going to heal up. And thank God I did. It was about a 10-year journey of healing up, getting some counseling, getting to a church, Bay Pres, where I'm at now. That was a healthy place and a lot of loving people, where I started feeling like, okay, maybe I could go back, but I don't know. We'll just do this gingerly. Well, it just so happens in God's providence that they had a big need for somebody. The previous care pastor had a stroke, and they needed help with funerals, and they needed help with that. And that's part of my heart of caring. I love caring for folks. I love doing that anyway. So it just was a mutual good relationship. I'll help you with, it's my toe in the water. I'll just help a little bit here. And as I started to do that, and we started to be on staff and starting to really love the staff and seeing a new change in leadership, and that they're called and they're getting sets, it was a good, healthy place. I felt like, yeah, this is a good place to set my roots long term. So I'm a permanent here doing care ministry, and it's been a very good experience so far. So yeah.
Excellent. Wow. Well, that's yeah, I mean, your journey is not that different from many people who end up in ministry.
Yes.
And I mean, goodness, what a lot of insights that you have, I'm sure, gleaned from just growing up in that, PK, as a PK.
Yes.
There's a lot of richness there that you can bring to this role. So while you're talking, or before we move on, I just want to encourage everybody who's watching, either as somebody registered on this webinar or watching the Facebook live stream, feel free to share any comments or questions that you'd like to have John address, and we will work those in as we are able to with this conversation. Again, talking about some things that pastors and ministry leaders can do to really help support good mental and emotional health. So let's just go ahead and jump right in. And I don't actually even know what the 5 things are. Beth, my coworker, was just so excited about this. She said, you have to talk to this guy. We have to have him on one of our webinars. And so because this has been a big focus for Key Ministry in particular this year, I think that our whole audience, ministry leader or not, but definitely ministry leaders, can really benefit from hearing some things that you think are important to support particularly ministry leaders' mental and emotional health. So go ahead, John.
Well, thank you. Well, first off, it's not brain surgery. What I'm going to share is not something maybe you've already thought about. Maybe it's just what God has shown me in my personal walk. So take what you can from it and use it if you can. If it doesn't work for you, that's fine too. I always get frustrated reading the books on church this, and these systems that are in place don't really fit where I'm at. And that's why I love the Holy Spirit. It's up to the Holy Spirit talking to you and through you in your ministry, and how you should deal with him and deal with Jesus. And so this is something that has been really valuable to me, but hope it's valuable to you. But if not, that's fine as well. So how this started was we were coming up with a care model for our church. And when we started doing a care model, we were big into community groups. Our church is trying to really focus on making our large church smaller. And so community groups is our primary discipleship engine. And in terms of our care, I wanted to, in growing with the vision of the church, to make that our care model as well. So in small groups, our care groups, our discipleship groups do care. They do all the loving one another, give grace to one, praying for one another. They're also those that if you're sick, visit them in the hospital and not just wait for a pastor or paid clergy to do that. And so that's kind of been our model. And as we go up the chain, it's care, and then ends up support groups, a little higher ed care. We have some one-on-one discipleship in Stephen's ministers, and then we go to counseling. And so that's kind of framework. But when I was doing this framework and I was sharing it with staff, it became abundantly clear to me that this model works for lay folks in our church for sure, because what we want is people to feel connected. We want people to be honest with each other, to feel loved and feel kind of just cared for. But I realized that it may not work for people on staff. And that's born out of what has happened to me with past church experience. Because here's how it goes. Typically, if you're in pastoral ministry, you'll know this, is that John Meaux, working at X, Y, and Z place, has a problem with his boss. Let's say he's really struggling with a couple things. My boss is being a big jerk. I don't know how to deal with him. He's a narcissist. I don't know what to do. I can go to my community group and I can say, hey, can you guys pray for me, help me out? Do you guys have any solutions for this? Or how about John Meaux working wants a different job altogether, right? Hey, I need prayer, guys. Could you pray for me? I'm thinking about moving on to a different place. Well, as those of you in pastoral ministry know, those kind of topics are probably you probably don't want to discuss those in open, especially if your boss is the senior pastor. It's highly inappropriate at times because that pastor is your boss is their pastor, and you want to be very careful. And so what we find is, and I find with a lot of pastors, is that their primary sounding board is their wife or their husband, and you have a problem because you burn out your husband and wife, but that senior pastor is also their pastor. So it gets tenuous. And so what happens to a lot of pastors, they feel isolated, alone. They don't open up. They don't want to give their heart to anybody because they don't know who they're going to step on, if it's going to be something else. It gets very complicated. Plus, the enduring fact of, if something goes wrong in your ministry and you have conflict and God chooses to have you just for your job, which is stressful enough, all the income that you're leaving and going on to something else can be very stressful. For me, it was very stressful when I chose to leave to something completely different. I was losing my job, but I also lost my church family. I couldn't go back to it because of the brokenness there, and we're trying to work on that. But so you lose your family, you lose your job, you lose your purpose. It's devastating for pastors. So what that does for pastors is it causes them they learn that, they hear this, they see this, and they internalize, they bring in, they put down deep. And what I found is that in those dark places of, I don't think I can trust, I don't know if I should speak, it could burn me in the end, it could cause an elder to do what, X, Y, and Z, it could cause my pastor to be hurt. In those places of darkness, that's where I think secrets start to happen. I think pressure starts to happen. I think mental illness is exacerbated in those issues. And out of that can cause people to explode. They explode spiritually, or going off and have things that are inappropriate and they're hiding it. And so that's the culture that I think pastors can't live in. So to come up with a way, it's a long roundabout to why this foundation for me is not so much what I'm going to talk about isn't personal, emotional health. It's using the body of believers or people you have in your group. I call it a team, your 5 team members, your 5 places structured to really help you expose those areas and to be safe, finding a safe place. So all the stuff about being with Christ and being in his spirit, being daily feeding, is all very valuable, all very important. But what I'm going to deal with primarily is how to do this in a context of community. Okay. So the first step that I think I use and I find very helpful right now, and I think it's one of the most important things and very easy, I think it's an easy step for all pastors, is you have to find a prayer team. You have to find people who not just, people I'll pray for you. You want to find the people that you trust, that you text them, they will immediately stop and they will pray for you. And it doesn't have to be a long, it just right then and there. So when I was starting a church plant a while ago, that was the first thing we did. We got a church plant, we got a prayer team. Well, I think for your personal ministry, you need somebody and a group of people I have to pray. So I have identified, that's the first pillar, is the prayer team. And so what I do with that is I will text them, very little thing. I tell them, I've asked them to be a part of this. I've explained it. I've also, I don't have to be very specific as well with these prayer requests. It's not like, hey, I'm meeting with my boss and he's a jerk face. That's not what I do. It's just, hey, there's a tough meeting and I really need your prayer. Or I'm really struggling right now. I'm overwhelmed. Could you just pray God would show me this and that? And what these people do, it encourages them to follow up, to pray and connect with me in the ministry. That's very first. If you don't have the prayer team, which is super easy, I think everybody should have, and it's very low risk, as long as you're not sharing stuff that would be inappropriate. So this prayer team's number 1. Number 2, and this is in my experience, is you have to, and if you don't have this, you can pray like crazy. You have to have a best friend or a group of friends that you absolutely trust, who may be in the church, but primarily might want to be outside the church. Now, this person, you have to be very intentional and completely honest. So a lot of people are like, okay, I don't have that. All right, that's fine. But what's going on right now is if you don't have anybody who truly knows you outside your spouse, I think you're not going to experience the absolute joy of being loved and being known. Because you can't really tell if people love you because you're Pastor Bill or Pastor John or Pastor Sally, but you can know that this person who knows you, all your secrets, all the stuff you're struggling with, loves you and prays for you and cares for you. He can keep, or she can keep, tabs on you. I have 2 folks in my life that I continually talk to but it's taken a long process. It's taken about 7-8 years to get to that place where there is a true, I can share reciprocation. It takes a nuanced approach. But if you don't have that one or two person that can dig deep, Jesus had his three, right? He had his people that he really got connected with intimately, besides the 12 and besides the 120, he had those three. Then I'm just encouraging all pastors, you have to have that somehow. Okay, questions and comments, anything before I go on to number 3?
Well, I am curious about that one. Do you consider, so you're talking about having a best friend group, someone you can be completely honest with. Would you consider, someone who is a professional counselor that you're seeing maybe semi-regularly, maybe only occasionally? I mean, would you consider someone in that sort of role to be an adequate person to be in this group, or is that something else that's perhaps going to be in one of your other pillars?
Uh-oh, they stopped talking. They're frozen again.
All right, it looks like John will drop off and get back on. So,
Okay.
but Catherine, I can tell you that I think that one's coming up in one of the future points.
Okay, excellent.
So, do you want to recap maybe what he said so far? Because I know there was some little
I mean, that's a great idea. So John has talked so far, and he's joining us again, but he's talked about how the community group model of care, which is wonderful, and a lot of churches use this not only for discipleship, but also for support for all of the important and hard things in people's lives, but how that does not work for the pastoral team or the leadership team of the church. And it makes perfect sense, because if your pastor is also your boss and you're having a hard time with your relationship with the pastor, or you don't understand, the direction that person is leading, you can't go talk to the pastor about that. You can't necessarily talk to your care team about that. So John has come up with some other ways that are really insightful and helpful for those who are in ministry. And we've gone over 2 so far. The first one is find a prayer team. And they need to be people who are available to be in touch with you and to respond to your cries for help, for prayer, whether it's text message, phone call, what have you. And then the second one of 5 is to have that that best friend or a best friend group, some person or people you can be completely honest with. So
John, Catherine was trying to do a spoiler while you were gone, so I'll let you take it from here.
Don't want to do a spoiler, but yeah. So my question was, and I'm not sure when you dropped off, John, but
right immediately when you asked the question, I was off. So go ahead again. Sorry about that.
Okay, no worries. I have like wonky internet too, so I get it. But yeah, so I was wondering if you think it's okay to have a therapist or a counselor be in that role of somebody outside of the church who you can be completely honest with, or is that in another pillar, or is that just not really the right kind of role for this friend or this group of friends with whom you can be really honest?
Yeah, so number 3, counseling, we can talk about that for sure, but the friendship is different than the counseling, obviously, the counseling relationship.
Right.
The counselor I can't call on a Friday night when I'm struggling with things, or I can't get to the nuts and bolts. Now, if you have a good Christian counselor, there's a discipleship kind of relationship that happens, but it would be in a professional way. You're paying somebody to listen to you, as opposed to somebody who is I'm listening to you because I love you, and it's reciprocated. So I think it's very important. This is where I think a lot of pastors struggle, because I think they have friends. I think that they think, oh, I've got a lot of friends. But if I would ask them, okay, the secret that you would share, a secret that you might have, because we all have secrets, we all have things we hide. There's a lot of insecurities. Does that person know that? Do they understand that deeply? Are you telling them everything? And if the answer is no, I'm not, then I wouldn't condemn you. I would just pray that God would give you a man or a woman in your life who could play that part. And primarily, I would say outside the church, particularly if you can, because it does get a little hairy when church goes wrong and you have to leave church. So I would say it's different. That's a good question, though, for sure.
Okay. Well, excellent. Well, and just throwing out right now, if you have a question, if you're participating in the webinar, if you're watching the live stream, please feel free to share those questions or comments, and we'll work them into the conversation with John. So, all right, so what's your third pillar then?
So number 3 is leading into the counselor. So what I found was, I think every pastor needs a good Christian counselor. I just really, and here's why I believe this. I believe there are things in your heart that has happened to you as children that sin is broken. My theology of sin is that it breaks every relationship. Nothing is untouched by sin. Everything is broken, which means you might have had a great upbringing and a great dad and a great mom, but in that even is brokenness. There's stuff that happens to you in college. It's just broken. And these things, I think what we tend to do is minimize them and think, I'm fine and it's just normal. But your normal might not be normal. And so I didn't realize how unnormal my normal was until I went to see a psychologist after some trauma had hit, some church-related trauma. And I went and I spoke, and I didn't even know. It was hard for me to even go to this person, right? Because I was raised, honestly, that psychology is more of a moral issue. Psychologists we should go to the Bible and go to the Word of God, which is very true. We should go to the Word of God. But for some reason, my tradition had taught that psychology was kind of a secular tradition and can't really help you. But what I found was some very helpful things clinically that helped me understand diagnoses of parents, diagnoses in my own life. So it came about that there were some traumas that this person helped me with. They really could flesh it out. They've had extensive help with helping pastors, which is a great thing. And also what they did is clinically diagnose me with ADHD, which I'd never known I had and never knew I had a problem with until I took some medicine. And all of a sudden, I'm trying to realize my whole life had been spent living like I was some person who was not in charge of my impulses, or I was just, I don't know why I was so couldn't focus. I was late. It was a moral issue. When this counselor helped me understand, no, it was not. It's a physiological issue. And that helped me so much, because now that I'm on medication, it's actually helped me been able to digest and understand God in newer and better ways and focused ways. So you need, even if you don't have any trauma or any diagnoses, it's just good to find a counselor, even in great times, that maybe someday in the future you might need, because it does take some time to find a counselor who you gel with, who you can relate to. I knew I went through a couple before I really found one who we truly clicked. And so as a pastor, I would encourage you to go try some out. Just go and just talk about life and things and see what comes up, especially in your past family emotional health, because I found that there's a lot of hidden areas in there that I didn't even know.
Right. Well, and I would just throw out here too that I love that the approach that you have, the theology of sin, that everything is touched by it, and just personally, I found that having a name that you can give to something gives you a huge degree of freedom. And in your case, not having been diagnosed with ADHD until you were an adult, obviously, having the medication and understanding that about yourself. If you understand something about yourself in a better way, it can only make you more effective as a pastor, as a believer, just in general in your life. So yeah, I think that's really an excellent point.
Right, and the thing about that is you're not going to know. That's why the community is so important. In order to see Jesus more clearly, God gives us community. And the reason why we need community is because God is not informational only, he's transformational. So when we are transformed by being around other people who know and love Jesus differently and who see things we don't and point them out inside us. Right. And so I think you cannot do this alone. It's impossible to have a transformational relationship using only information. And so what happens is we tend to believe that we got it and we figured it out, but there are hidden gems there in your heart that I think God designs for other people to call out, and a counselor is trained to look for it clinically. And there are things in your heart that you might want to at least explore that might free you up from some things, diagnoses, even just even family fact patterns to help you. If your spouse is saying, hey, you're very irritable, or you're always this way after sermons, or there's something going on here, I would not fight that. I would say, okay, there's something she is pointing out in my life. Right. And we need to go explore that. And we need trained people to help us with that.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Well, I just want to throw in here real quick. We got a comment in our Facebook chat that a lady who's watching said that she thinks it's wonderful to let the church know that our pastors are human, that they have needs and emotions, and they need to take care of themselves so they can be filled with joy and help others. And that they need prayers as well. And that is all very true. And I mean, it's great that we have Pastors Appreciation Month once a year, but boy, I mean, there's just an awful lot of stress and secondary trauma. And again, I don't know what you're going to talk about, but there is so much secondary trauma that pastors deal with. And so I just think it's really wise what you've said so far about, particularly with pastors seeking counseling so that they can just process kind of away from what they're doing on a day-to-day basis and all the struggles that they're dealing with, that they can process with somebody who is trained to help them.
Yes. And even if they come up with no diagnosis, well, good. At least you've unearthed some and you're trying.
Yes.
And then I found that at least you have somebody in your back pocket that if a marriage gets difficult or you're just burned out or you feel like even a little anxious, you have someone to go to in a place where it's safe. And that's I would start building that now if you don't have that for sure. So then out of those three things, we talked about prayer and then best friend or someone who really knows you and then this counselor. What starts to happen if you're paying attention is that God starts to bring up some things in our hearts and in our minds that we're like, that wasn't right. I have patterns of things I do, sinful things I continually do. And when you recognize those things, it's helpful to find number 4. It's helpful to then go into mentors. You need some mentors. And now what is, I've had 8 years of kind of working through the past church stuff, church traumas, church split, realizing some of it was not my fault. Some of it was patterns that I did that I was responsible for. And patterns I do never want to repeat because it was so devastating to me, my family. I was idolizing the pastorate. I was trying to hold on to things that was just not godly. And when God showed me these things, boy, I want to have a holy fear that I don't want to fall back into those things. So what these counselors and my best friend can point to in the prayer God unearths through the Holy Spirit is these things. And that's where you bring mentors in. And so that's the 4th one, mentors. So mentors are a little different than best friends. Mentors are people that I typically think are older. They're wiser than you. They have abilities to experience that they can rely on. Mentors are people that I have in my life personally, and I've broken them up in terms of one. I have one for church mentor, so pastor mentor. This is a person who has some pastoral experience. I trust that I could talk to them to say, hey, I'm having a trouble with my senior pastor. Now, I love my senior pastor. We have no problems. He's my best friend. You're great. So if you're listening right now, but this person understands that that there are going to be conflicts. When senior pastor and associates don't agree on things, there's conflict. We're going to work through it. And I need someone to walk me through, hey, that was your baggage. In fact, the other day I had a talk like this where I was in a ministry issue and I brought it up and they frankly said, John, you're carrying your baggage into that situation. And they made a point of it was so good to me. I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't even see it because I had told them what my baggage was before they become my mentor. I say, look, here are my tendencies that my counselor, my best friend, and my wife keep telling me. Just be aware of this so that when I bring issues up, you can always be that framework of, oh, okay. And that saved me from a lot of problems that I was going to have if I would have done it the way I thought I should have done it. So I have a ministry mentor who has been in the ministry, older, wiser, can say, hey, I think you should do this. I have a parenting mentor. I've had some parenting stuff that I have to walk through. And these are older and wiser people that can go, hey, I've been there. Don't you worry. My child was this, and now my child and I are real close. So it helps us through with their experience. I have one for marriage. And so those kind of 3 mentors are also, by the way, on some of my prayer texts, help me walk through this so that I'm not alone in their unearthing and another way that they're giving me their experience. So I've got a best friend who's we're at our peer level. They give me their love and their understanding, their prayers when I can be real honest. I have a counselor who has a clinical kind of advice and clinical approach that helps me. And now I have experience, older saints who can understand church and how church is made. They're not thrown off by, hey, pastors are having problems. You might want to find mentors outside the church too that don't know your senior pastor so they can have an objective evidence of it. And we're relying on their experience. So those are kind of the 3 things. And then the 4th thing that I find helpful that I'm still working on, see, this is a progress, is a peer. Someone outside of the church who's another care pastor who we can meet on a regular, semi-regular basis to walk through just regular ministry experience, because they typically have the same kind of experience as I most of the time. So I did this back when I was a worship leader. I found a worship leader in another church in our denomination that we became friends, and it wasn't a deep, intimate friendship where they're knowing all my secrets for sure, but they would know my struggles as dealing with different ministry leaders. How do I deal with that? How do I work in this church context? Because they have a different church context, and they'll help me see maybe my church context is not as good as maybe something I should have. They're on the outside doing the same job. And so it's always helpful, and we have a ton of churches in the area, and there's one I'm trying to identify and work on. I've met already with the care pastor of another church, but trying to drum up kind of more of a relationship with that person, and could be an older pastor. So it's a long-winded answer to your question about the 5 pillars, but I have found that what it does is give me a support to rely on, that if everything goes south here at Bay Presbyterian Church, let's just say things go awry, or God moves me on, or there's something that happens I need to move on, there's a support system there that helps me be healthy. So I'm doing it well, I'm doing it wisely, I'm doing it what God would want as best as my abilities. And also it's still supporting me after church. It's not reliant on the church. It doesn't matter about church or not. It's still my team that'll support me despite the church.
Right. That's excellent. Yeah. And I mean, you do see that these things happen, like happened in your family, that sadly happens with frustrating regularity, or you see pastors even walking away from the faith.
Yes.
And to me, that's the saddest tragedy of all, because, people who have been under, their ministry often will suffer a similar kind of loss of faith if that happens. And this kind of model that you just talked about help preserve the pastor in their relationship with Christ, even if everything else around them in their job falls apart. So, kudos to you for figuring out something that's really important for others who are in your position.
It's a brutal job.
Yeah.
I don't mean it's brutal in a way because there's expectations upon pastors that I think are unfair. And I think there's some expectations on pastors that we pastors put on ourselves that are not godly, that make us feel like we're the only person in the room, that we have to have it all together. I mean, I'm glad I'm not the senior pastor, because I'm sure my senior pastor feels like he has to be the CEO. He's got to be the perfect shepherd. He's also got to be the perfect worship leader. He's got to know how to do everything at all times. Now, he doesn't feel that way. He's very healthy, but just that feeling of people putting on our senior pastor. If they leave the church, it's always because of something he didn't either preach well enough, or he didn't do this for me. And so there's that expectation, and that drives us inward, and it drives us to lonely places. And in that, Christ says, I'm the light of the world. And he says, he who follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. And when we have that light in our life, there's health, there's desire, there's freedom, and there's joy. In darkness, there is no joy. And so that's my heart for pastors who are listening to this right now, that if you feel that way, there's hope, there's light. And so that's where I want to land it. Yeah.
A person I knew a few years ago was talking about a problem, and she said, you got to drag it to the light.
Yes.
And I mean, because you're exactly right. Nothing gets dealt with if it's, hidden in the darkness. Well, let me ask a question then. So your official role at Bay Pres is Assistant Pastor of Care Ministries. So I think that lots of churches just get into analysis paralysis when they start thinking about mental health type ministries. But really, it's not a big program. It's more of a shift in the way you think about things. So I guess, what are some things that you are doing at Bay Pres in addition to these pillars for pastors? How are you all approaching mental health support for the people that, for whom you are shepherding?
Yeah. So in the Bay Pres context, we've had a tradition of having counselors, which I'm very thankful for. I've seen that in very few churches, and we have counselors. We have 2 counselors who I can rely heavily on when we need pastoral counseling or they need counsel. We have 2 clinical counselors, and we have 1 biblical counselor. And it's been just a joy to have that. We also have support groups. Now, these are homegrown support groups where, for instance, a couple of gentlemen who were addicted to pornography went through a program and got changed. They are clean, and for years they've been clean, and they want other men to know this. So they use a support group. They use some criteria from 7 pillars some of their material to go through it, and that's a support group. We've had several of those. And so what I think for those who don't have this kind of resource, because a lot of churches don't have this kind of resource, and again, yeah, you don't want to overthink it. What I would do first if I had nothing, and knowing what I know now about how clinical psychology or clinical Christian care has helped me personally, is I would personally start to visit some psychologists or counselors. Just go get a counselor yourself, or hear of other counselors you can just meet with. And why would you want to do that? Well, it's good to know who's good, because when someone comes to you and is like, I need psychology or I need counseling, you have people you trust that you can send them to, you can outsource. Because a lot of pastors doing a lot of counseling on their own, which is great, but sometimes that can burn you out. Sometimes it's not your gift set. Sometimes you're just limited in what you can do. And I would find those, I would just call them, people you can send out to. It would be really helpful for sure. But also when you use counseling, when you use mental health, when you use those to treat yourself, what you'll find is be open and honest about it within reason. Now, one thing you'll hear people say, pastors should be open and honest at all times to all people. I don't think so. I don't think that's healthy. I don't think there's boundaries in place. I think being appropriate with what we share about our own lives in context is need to be guarded. I don't think in any way, shape, or form being in the light means everybody in your church knows everything about you. I don't think that's fair. I don't think
totally
that's
agree.
healthy.
Yeah. Right.
But when you can share and you feel comfortable sharing, like I shared about ADHD is not a tough thing, but some people maybe suffer from depression and don't want to share that. But if you can in some way share that you've at least seen a counselor, it might free that person who has been raised like I was in my biblical context and my church tradition, that there's some stigma to that. And that kind of frees people up to go, well, maybe I should find a Christian counselor. And then they go to you and you send them to a person you trust who's going to give them Jesus in their clinical work. You're going to give them Jesus in their biblical counseling, because that's the point. If we're not directing people in mental health to the point, to the caregiver, to Jesus Christ, then it's all for naught. In a clinical setting, we can give people Jesus by helping them understand their brain. And I use this example. It's hard to know Jesus when you're passed out on the floor, right? Because if you got hit in the head and I fall over, I'm not going to have an experience with Jesus because I'm passed out, because God uses our brains to meet us. And if our brains are malfunctioning or they're misfiring, that is not a moral issue. But we need to help people get back to a place where then they can meet Jesus through their mental illness. And so there shouldn't be a stigma on that whatsoever. So that's kind of a few steps that we do. And then lastly, out of that, as you grow it, what happens is you'll see people who are passionate about mental health, who've been helped, they will start groups. So we had somebody just recently start a NAMI group, which is National Association of Mental Illness. It's a group just for people who struggle with mental illness, who have family members who struggle with mental illness, because they got trained through NAMI. They themselves have children who have struggled through mental illness, and they wanted to help others. So if you just raise the temperature a little bit, you don't have to, out of all the stuff you have to do, pastors, you don't have to do much in this. You really don't. You just got to kind of raise the temperature a little bit, make awareness, and push people towards people who can help.
Yeah, and I think, one thing that is a just phenomenal thing that has happened this year with so many churches going online. This year, I cannot count how many churches I have seen reference anxiety, depression, emotional health, mental health by the pastor in the pulpit on Sunday morning. And before this year, it was rare. Statistics said that most pastors did that sort of thing once a year or less. And now, like I said, I cannot count how many pastors I have seen myself, just in my work with Key Ministry, referencing, the emotional and mental health struggles that people are going through, which they absolutely should be, because what a devastating year in pretty much every way. But that has been a major leap forward from the perspective of, a person who's working in mental health ministry. So, and I love what you said about, seeking that clinical help. And I've encouraged people, and I do encourage people that, if you have a brain tumor, you don't want to go to, the person who is the worst brain surgeon in town. You want to find the best brain surgeon in town, and you don't care, what that person does in their faith life. You just want the best brain surgeon. And I think that can be really helpful too, especially if you're just getting started with trying to understand what the mental health needs are, you want to go to somebody who has seen a lot, who has worked with a lot of different kinds of cases, who can help you figure out, okay, I'm John and I have ADHD, to get to that place. And then, once you get on that kind of path, then unpack it with your biblical counselor, because, God allowed this in your life. So what does that mean for you?
Yes.
I mean, the person who's the expert psychiatrist may or may not have a walk with Christ where they can help you unpack that. And that's not their job in that role. But boy, that biblical counselor can really help with that. So just throwing that out there.
Sure, because some churches do a either or. I do not like either or. I don't think one bullet fits one person. It's just way too complex. There's a lot of things going on with the mind. The Bible talks about three things. You got that attack the mind. You got the devil. They talk about spiritual forces. They talk about it talks about the flesh, your own flesh and background, and it talks about your sinful nature. And what happens, I think, is people are too complex to go, it's one size fits all. But I like your approach of, if it's clinical and you've got some clinical help, you also have biblical counselors who are going to attack the idols in your life as well. It's a both and it's not one or. And so I really like that approach, because people can get one side or the other, and there's fights. People fight over this. And I just think it's a both and people are very complex.
Yeah. Yep. Well, so we're almost at 12:45. So I just want to encourage you, if you're on the webinar, if you're watching on the live stream, please, send any comments or questions so we can get them in for John before we get to the top of the hour.
Or any fun jokes as well. I need some dad jokes. I've been running out. So if you got any dad jokes, I love those for sure.
Okay. Yeah. We actually had a calendar of bad dad jokes for my husband last year, the year before. Some of them were truly awful and spectacular. So
that for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So this was something that I thought about as preparing for this. One thing that my church has talked about off and on for years, and that I know is really important for millennials, is the concept of authenticity. Mm-hmm. And, I appreciate that you said you don't need to go spill your guts about every single thing if on Sunday morning in the pulpit, if you're the pastor, but authenticity is really important in our culture. And so how do you think that kind of plays in with what you're talking about with these pillars of support? How can having these pillars, how can that increase your authenticity as a ministry leader? I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
So yeah, authenticity, I've heard that for sure with millennials. I think there's two components to it for sure. I think there's humility. I think what people respond to is humility, and they also respond to honesty. Those are the two things I see that when you say authenticity, we're talking about. But here's what I find in most pastors too, and in my own life. What happens is they don't do the hard work to even know themselves. And if you don't do the hard work to know who you are, how you're built, how you're made, your background, how sin has affected you, how you spin, how you work, then I don't know how you project an authentic self to anybody. What you tend to do is, if you don't know and love the person that God made you to be, meaning, God, you made me this way, and I'm going to love that because you made me, because I love you. If you don't have that, then what happens is we project. So I see this a lot in preaching. I see this a ton in preaching. So you find your favorite preacher and you try to mimic that favorite preacher. But what your church does not need is that favorite preacher. Even though they might be the best communicator in the world, what your church needs is you and your gifts and your talents and your lacking and your misgivings and your sin. They need that because God called you there. And so what I would encourage you to do is find out who you are. It says the heart is deceitful above everything else. And if you think it's not deceitful, then you're just going to live a life of deceiving yourself. And then your church, who will know, because it's like my kids know who I am. I live with them 24/7. They know if I'm a hypocrite or not. They know if I'm authentic or not. They can smell it. Well, your church is the same way. And unfortunately, your church is going to become like you, your strengths and weaknesses. And so that's, again, why I cannot encourage you enough to dig deep to these issues with those 5 things, to dig to those places to get authentic. And then once you find it, once you are working through it, you need a help. This is where I take mentors. People who you trust can say, hey, when I preach, am I being authentic to me? Do you sense, to be brutally honest, because this is what we're trying to get to, the honesty point. And out of your call for honesty, as you're trying to find your own honesty, and people you trust are telling you, yeah, you were honest there. I saw John Meaux there, but I saw your baggage there. When you start to do that, humility comes out, because you're just going, I'm broken. And out of that, people want more than anything, instead of delivery, instead of polished communication, instead of right kind of making sure you have the right biblical thinking, what they want is a humble leader who is, and they just sense it. You don't have to say I'm humble. You just sense it. So that's what I would say that people, not just 20 and millennials, want. I think every pastor, every church person really wants to see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. Well, so you mentioned getting connected to your local counselors if you're a pastor, and that's something that we've advocated for a long time as well, because you do want to have a good handoff when somebody comes to you and you realize it's not a spiritual issue, it's something far different that another professional person should be helping the person walk through. But what, if any, what other local resources or services have you used when you've been helping people connect to resources? Or, you mentioned the NAMI support groups. Those are outstanding. They're all over the US and beyond. What other, are there any other local resources that you would really recommend that folks consider if they're referring people to get some help for their mental health needs?
Yeah, we try to recommend North Coast Family Foundation for a clinical approach. They have a group of counselors that they do adolescents, they do adults, they do marriage. So they have a wide berth. They have 2 PhDs, and then they have a lot of counselors, and so you can use them. We recommend them. We also recommend. I recommend Grace Church. I've been trying to get in a send. I'm trying to get into a relationship with Grace Church in Middleburg Heights. They do a lot of what we really want to be in a few years. And what I mean by that is they not only have your normal support groups such as AA and Al-Anon and those sorts of things, Overeaters Anonymous, because they love their community. They also have a ton of support groups. We have a few, they have a ton more. And so we're trying to do a church link up so that they feel like we can help each other, but mostly they can help us grow and expand our support groups. They also have a very good counseling department that I've even used with some folks, and it's been helpful there. We have individual counselors that are in Bay that we use, Bay Pres that we use, but I've also found the NAMI to be very helpful for folks. Off the top of my head, there's we have had to use some for spousal abuse. There's some resources out there for spousal abuse. I'm blanking on where to get that, but we have a kind of a set place we go for spousal abuse and for those sorts of things, for suicide prevention and that sort of thing. We have those are national resources and hotlines that we help people with for sure, because we do face that at times, and it's a little out of our league for immediate care. If they need immediate care, those are certain things we use for sure.
Right. And I think it's just really wise to not consider other churches in your area as competitors. I think that is something that is a natural knee-jerk kind of thought, but it shouldn't be. And everybody can't be everything to everyone in their care. And so it's just wise, in my view, to have, if your church just doesn't have enough volunteer leaders to run all these different support groups, well, goodness, another church with, different people, different passions and experiences may have the volunteers. So definitely, sync up your Al-Anon group, or my church used to have a sexual abuse survivors group, and, that sort of thing. I mean, no one church is, sex abuse or alcoholism or drug abuse is not only happening in your church. It's happening, it's touching people in every church in your area. So it just makes sense to partner with folks in that way.
It does. And Catherine, that's a great point, because here's what we found is we do also AA groups. We have a large AA group that meets in the basement of Bay Pres. And we found that a few Bay Pres members don't go there. They go down to Brecksville because they don't want to run into people from Bay.
Right.
And then they went there and they found that there's 5 guys from Bay going down there. So it's what's happening is I want people from Grace to feel the love of Jesus by coming here, Grace Middleburg Heights, and I want our folks to feel like they can go there without any stigma. And if you're territorial, people are going to go find that anyway, and it just makes it easier for sure.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, we are 10 minutes from the top of the hour, last call, if you will, to be able to submit a question or comment to John. This has been such a great discussion. I think you know that Key Ministry is hosting the online pastors retreat October 5th, 6th, and 7th, but it's one of those kind of virtual things. It's going to be available basically forever. People will be able to sign up after the fact, but we really hope that if you're watching or you're curious, that you'll go ahead and register, because you'll get the very best price before September 22nd. But we put this together because we have been so concerned about the mental and emotional health needs of pastors from the get-go when the pandemic started, in part because what we were seeing in Europe, but also because of just what we knew about the challenges of being a pastor just every single day. So I would just love to hear what word or sentence of encouragement you'd like to leave pastors with who may be viewing this. In this challenging year and being a pastor every day, what's that encouragement that you would like to offer?
Yeah, that's great. I'm glad you guys are doing that. I mean, it's so important. I heard this week, and this is really true. Christ, as a pastor, Christ doesn't want your help. He wants your heart. That's the key. He wants your heart. And if there are dark places and secret places, and you're afraid to expose those because you're going to lose your job, you might lose your community, you might lose your marriage, you might lose whatever, I'm just going to tell you, God so wants your heart that he is close to the brokenhearted, meaning those who are honest and open and broken, God grabs them with their arms, and he will not let you down despite what you think about losing your job, losing anything. God will take care of you. It's more important to have your heart right before God, and that requires exposure. So instead of saying, I'm going to help God, I'm going to work for God, give him your heart. And there's moments like these weekends where you can honestly and give God your heart and let him work on that, so that you can be the person, not the pastor God wants you to be. Forget that. That's a position. But to be the person, the son and daughter of God before him. Because that's the thing. Not Pastor John. It's son John is what the most important thing is. And so I think that's what I would speak to.
Right. Wow. That's super powerful. Well, John, thank you so much. This has just been really an incredible conversation, and I hope that we can call upon you again in the future, because I think I'd like to hear more about, how things unfold with the ministry that God has called you to and where he has planted you with Bay Pres. And I know somebody who works down the hall from you, so I think that, she'll be able to check in every so often to see how things are going. But
I got to go talk to my counselor. She's so mean. I have to go talk to her about it.
Gotcha.
Her.
Well, so thank you so much, those of you who were able to join us today. We host these webinars pretty much every week, so we encourage you to go look at our events page. That's keyministry.org/events. We have every other Monday, we have conversations with disability ministry leaders around the country to help come together and solve solutions or share ideas about pandemic-related needs in your ministry. And then each week we have a topical either webinar or discussion on issues related to mental health, parenting, or special needs ministry. So I encourage you to follow us on social media or just check back in often on keyministry.org. So for Beth Golick, Dr. Gersovich, our president and founder, and myself, Catherine Boyle, thank you for joining Key Ministry, and we'll see you again real soon.
Thank you guys. Appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Take care.